Cheap things don't belong in a Caldwell family photograph. That is what she said after she reached behind my daughter's neck, unclasped the only necklace my wife ever owned, and dropped it into a silver champagne bucket full of melting ice. Not accidentally, not clumsily, not in one of those awkward moments people spend years apologizing for. She looked my daughter in the eye, smiled for the room, and let my late wife's pearls fall into the ice like they were trash. There were 42 people standing under crystal chandeliers at the engagement party. Friends, cousins, investors, donors, the groom's family, my daughter's co-workers, and half a dozen people who had spent the evening pretending not to stare at my old brown suit. The photographer had just called for a family picture. My daughter, Grace, was standing beside her fiancé, Evan, with both hands folded in front of her, wearing a blue dress she had paid for herself and the small pearl necklace her mother wore on our wedding day. Then Evan's mother, Victoria Caldwell, stepped in close and said, loud enough for every person near the fireplace to hear, "Oh, sweetheart, no. Cheap things don't belong in a Caldwell family photograph." Before Grace could move, Victoria's fingers were already at the clasp. My daughter froze. The pearls fell into the ice. The room went quiet in that terrible way. A room goes quiet when everyone knows something cruel just happened, but they are all waiting to see who has enough courage to call it cruel. Grace lifted one hand to her throat. Evan, the man who was 6 weeks away from promising to protect her for the rest of his life, did not step forward. He did not touch her shoulder. He did not tell his mother to put the necklace back. He looked at the photographer and said, "Maybe we should take 5. That was when I understood what kind of man my daughter was about to marry. Victoria Caldwell thought she had embarrassed a poor old widower from Kansas who wore the same brown suit to every important occasion because it still fit and because his daughter once told him he looked handsome in it. She thought I was just a retired government employee with a pickup truck older than some of her handbags. She thought I would swallow the insult because people like me usually do. She was mistaken. I walked over to that champagne bucket, reached into the ice with my bare hand, lifted my wife's necklace out, wrapped it carefully in my handkerchief, and gave it back to my daughter. Then I left the ballroom and made 2 phone calls. My name is Samuel Mercer. I am 68 years old. I live in a little brick house in Wichita, Kansas, 2 blocks from a Methodist church that rings its bell 10 minutes fast every Sunday morning. My front steps are cracked, my garage door complains in cold weather, and my backyard fence leans toward my neighbor's tomatoes like it is trying to start a conversation. I have lived there for 34 years. That is the house where my wife, Elaine, planted irises along the walkway because she said a home should greet people before the people inside it did. That is the house where I raised Grace after cancer took Elaine at 49 and left me with a 12-year-old girl who had her mother's soft voice and my stubborn jaw. I am not wealthy. I never pretended to be. I drive a 2009 Ford Ranger with a dent in the passenger door from a grocery cart that attacked it during a thunderstorm. I iron my shirts on Sunday nights. I polish my shoes even when nobody is going to notice. I still keep a handkerchief in my pocket because my father did, and because life gives you more uses for one than people think. Most folks see me and assume I spent my life behind a counter somewhere, stamping forms and eating sandwiches out of wax paper. They are not entirely wrong. I did spend my life in government offices. I did stamp forms. I did eat a great many sandwiches out of wax paper. But for 31 years, I worked as a federal healthcare fraud investigator, Medicare billing schemes, nursing home chains, phantom patients, inflated therapy hours, shell nonprofits, kickbacks disguised as consulting fees. I followed money through paper trails that men with private jets thought were too complicated for a man like me to understand. Men and women like Victoria Caldwell were not new to me. They were just better dressed than most. Grace was 32 when she met Evan Caldwell. She worked as a pediatric social worker at a children's hospital in Kansas City. She had chosen the kind of work that breaks your heart on Monday and asks you to show up smiling again on Tuesday. She remembered every child's favorite stuffed animal. She knew which parents needed coffee before paperwork and which ones needed silence. She could sit beside a frightened mother without trying to fix the grief too fast. That is a rare gift. Evan was 36, polished, well-mannered, and handsome in the way men become handsome when nobody has ever told them no. He worked for his family's company, Caldwell Meridian, a senior care and assisted living empire stretching across 5 states. His mother was the founder, chairwoman, public face, and private weather system of the whole operation. When Grace first brought Evan to my house, he arrived with flowers and a bottle of expensive olive oil because Grace had told him I liked to cook. He complimented my porch. He asked about Elaine's picture on the mantel. He listened when I spoke. At least, he seemed to listen. But I noticed small things. I noticed how quickly he checked his phone when Grace talked about her work. I noticed how he smiled before answering hard questions, as if searching for the version of himself that would sound best. I noticed that every time his mother called, he stepped into another room, and when he came back, the air around him had changed. Still, I kept my thoughts to myself. Parents, you know this part. There is a point in your child's life when love becomes a chair you sit in quietly. You can warn, you can ask, you can hold the door open, but you cannot live the life for them. And Grace loved him. The first time I met Victoria Caldwell, she did not insult me directly. People like Victoria rarely begin there. They test the room first. It was at a restaurant in Kansas City with a wine list thicker than my truck manual. She wore white, which seemed impractical for dinner, and diamonds that looked less like jewelry and more like a warning. She gave me her hand the way a queen might give a ribbon to a schoolchild. "So," she said, after we sat down, "Grace tells me you were with the government." "I was," I said. "What department?" "Health and Human Services. Investigations." Her smile paused for half a second and then returned. "How noble," she said. "Public work. I suppose someone has to do it." There was nothing obviously rude in the words. That was her talent. She could wrap contempt in tissue paper and hand it to you like a gift. Over dinner, she talked about the Caldwell name, the foundation, the new memory care campus outside St. Louis, the gala they hosted every spring, the senators who had attended, the hospital wings they had made possible. She used the word legacy 7 times. I counted because counting is what I do when I am trying not to speak too soon. Grace squeezed my knee under the table once. That meant, "Please, Dad." So I smiled. I ate my salmon. I let Victoria perform. The engagement party happened 3 months later at the Hawthorne Club, a private club outside Kansas City where the grass looked too perfect to have grown honestly. Victoria insisted on hosting. She said Grace deserved to be welcomed properly into the Caldwell family. I had learned long ago that when certain people use the word welcome, they mean inspection. Grace called me the week before and asked if I would wear the brown suit. "Mom always liked that one," she said. So I did. I arrived early because I am that kind of man. The ballroom had tall windows, white roses, gold chairs, and servers carrying trays of appetizers small enough to make you wonder who had hurt them. A string quartet played near the entrance. On one side of the room was a large display board with photographs of Evan and Grace, though I noticed most of them had been selected to show Evan's family houses, Evan's family vacations, Evan's family charity events. Grace was in them, but often off to the side. My sister Ruth came with me. She is 71, has silver hair down to her shoulders, and has never once in her life mistaken politeness for surrender. "She's arranged this room like a museum exhibit," Ruth whispered. "Behave," I said. "I'm behaving with my mouth," she said. "My thoughts are none of your business." For the first hour, everything went smoothly enough. Grace looked beautiful. Not expensive, not staged. Beautiful. She wore a blue dress and Elaine's pearls. Those pearls were not valuable in the way jewelers measure value. They were small, slightly uneven, and had been bought by my father-in-law in 1978 from a department store counter in Tulsa. Elaine wore them at our wedding, at Grace's baptism, at Grace's high school graduation, and in the last family picture we ever took before the illness hollowed her cheeks. When Grace asked to wear them for her engagement party, I had to sit down for a minute before answering. Victoria greeted guests like she was receiving tribute. Evan hovered near her, laughing when she laughed, turning when she turned. Several times, I saw Grace reach for his hand, and several times, he drifted away before he noticed. Then Victoria began her little cuts. She introduced me to a donor as Grace's father, Sam, retired from some federal office. She asked Ruth whether she was still in that little town, though Ruth has lived in Lawrence for 25 years. She told one of her friends that Grace's work with hospital families was so grounding, the way someone might describe volunteering at an animal shelter. I watched. I waited. Then came the toast. Victoria stood near the fireplace with a glass of champagne. The room quieted quickly because people like her train rooms to quiet quickly. She spoke of family, legacy, responsibility, and the importance of joining lives with people who understood the weight of a name. She said Evan had been raised to carry something larger than himself. She said marriage was not merely romance, but alignment. That word bothered me. Alignment. It made my daughter sound like a piece of furniture being moved into place. Then, Victoria turned toward Grace and smiled. And Grace, she said, brings such warmth, such sincerity, such a refreshing lack of pretense. A few people chuckled softly, unsure whether they had permission. Grace's smile stayed on her face, but I saw the effort it took. Victoria lifted her glass higher. We are delighted to help polish that sincerity into something ready for the life ahead. Ruth inhaled through her nose, like a bull seeing red cloth. I put one hand on her wrist. Not yet. The photographer stepped forward a few minutes later and announced family portraits. Victoria began arranging people with quick little finger movements, Evan beside her. Grace beside Evan, Victoria's husband, who had spoken maybe 11 words all night. On the other side, me, at the edge. I did not mind the edge. I have learned a great deal from edges. The photographer raised his camera. Victoria looked at Grace. Her eyes stopped at the pearls. The room did not know it yet, but this was the moment that would undo her. Oh, sweetheart, Victoria said, putting one hand to her chest. No. Grace blinked. What? Victoria stepped closer. That necklace. It's sweet, but it won't photograph well. Grace's hand went to the pearls. It was my mother's. Yes, Victoria said, and the softness in her voice was worse than shouting. I assumed. Evan looked at the floor. Grace said, I'm wearing it. Victoria smiled at the photographer, then at the guests, then back at my daughter. Cheap things don't belong in a Caldwell family photograph. Then she reached behind Grace's neck. I saw my daughter stiffen. I saw Evan's hand lift half an inch and then fall. I saw every adult in that polished room decide, one by one, that comfort mattered more than courage. The clasp opened. The pearls dropped. They struck the ice in the champagne bucket with a small sound I will hear until the day I die. Grace did not cry. That would have been easier to watch. She simply went still, one hand at her bare throat, her eyes shining with something hotter than tears. Victoria gave a tiny laugh. There. Better. We'll find you something more appropriate. Evan cleared his throat. Mom, maybe. Victoria turned her head. He stopped. That was all it took. I walked across the room slowly. I did not hurry, because hurrying gives people the satisfaction of thinking they have knocked you off balance. I reached into the champagne bucket. The ice burned my fingers. I found the pearls, lifted them out, and laid them in my handkerchief. Then I turned to my daughter. Gracie, I said, come here. She came to me like she was 12 again, and trying very hard not to fall apart before reaching the car. I placed the pearls in her palm and closed her fingers around them. Go with Aunt Ruth to the ladies' room, I said quietly. Dry them off. Take your time, she whispered. Dad, I'm here, I said. I am right here. Ruth put her arm around Grace and led her out. Nobody stopped them. Then I turned back to Victoria. She had not moved. Her smile was smaller now, but still there. I said, Mrs. Caldwell, I want to make sure I understand what just happened. The room seemed to lean in. You removed my late wife's necklace from my daughter's neck without permission, I said, dropped it into an ice bucket, and told her cheap things don't belong in your family photograph. Is that correct? Her face tightened. Mr. Mercer, you're making this unnecessarily dramatic. I asked if it was correct. It was a styling issue. A styling issue, I repeated. Evan stared at me with panic in his eyes, not shame, panic. There is a difference. Victoria lifted her chin. I was trying to prevent embarrassment. I looked at the ice bucket, then at my daughter's fiancé, then at the people pretending not to listen. I see, I said. That was all. I did not yell. I did not threaten. I did not tell the room what kind of person she was, though I had a full list ready in my head. I picked up my coat from the back of a chair and walked into the hallway outside the ballroom. The first call was to a woman named Angela Reese. Angela and I had worked together for 19 years. She was now with a regional Medicaid fraud control unit, sharp as a hawk and twice as patient. We had not spoken in 3 months, But when I called, she answered on the third ring. Sam? She said. You all right? I need to ask you something unofficial, I said. A name. Caldwell Meridian Senior Living, Victoria Caldwell. Silence. Not long, but enough. Why are you asking? My daughter is engaged to her son. Another silence, longer this time. Angela said, carefully, that is not a name I would want my child legally tied to without independent counsel. My throat went dry. Can you tell me more? You know I can't. I do. What I can say, she said, is that some houses look clean because all the dirt is under the rug. I closed my eyes for a moment. Is it active? Sam. All right, I said. That answers me. Before she hung up, Angela said, protect your daughter from signatures. Anything board-related, foundation-related, investment-related. Do you hear me? I hear you. The second call was to Marcus Bell, an attorney in St. Louis who specialized in healthcare compliance and civil fraud. I had mentored him early in his career, back when he was young enough to think outrage was a legal strategy. He had since become one of the best men I knew at untangling dirty money, dressed up as charity. He did not answer, so I left a message. Marcus, it's Sam Mercer. I need you to look at Caldwell Meridian and the Caldwell Family Foundation as soon as you can. My daughter may be exposed through marriage documents. Call me tonight if you're awake, tomorrow if you're sane. Then I stood there in the hallway with my cold fingers wrapped around my phone and listened to the muffled music from inside the ballroom. People think restraint feels peaceful. It does not. Sometimes restraint feels like holding a door shut while a fire is on the other side. I wanted to walk back in and embarrass Victoria Caldwell the way she had embarrassed Grace. I wanted to tell every donor in that room that a woman who could throw a dead mother's pearls into ice would throw anything away once it stopped serving her. But I had spent my career learning that the moment you most want to strike is often the moment you should look for the load-bearing wall. So I went to find my daughter. Grace and Ruth were in a small sitting room near the restrooms. Grace was seated on a velvet bench, turning the pearls over in her hands. Ruth stood by the door with the expression of a woman hoping someone would be foolish enough to enter. Grace looked up at me. Did you leave? For a minute. You made a call. I made two. She gave a small laugh, but there was no humor in it. Of course you did. I sat beside her. I need to ask you something, and I need the full truth. Has Victoria asked you to sign anything? Grace looked away. There it was. What? I asked. Just foundation papers, she said. Evan said it was ceremonial. His mother wanted me listed on a youth outreach committee after the wedding. They said it would look good because of my hospital work. What papers? I haven't signed. They're in my email. Forward them to me tonight. She looked at me then, really looked. Dad, what is going on? I don't know enough yet, I said, but I know enough to say this. You do not sign anything from that family until an attorney who represents only you reads it. Not Evan's attorney, not Victoria's, yours. Her face changed. Not fear exactly. Recognition. She didn't do that because of the necklace, Grace whispered. No, I said. The necklace was only where she let us see her. Grace closed her eyes. A tear finally slipped down her cheek, and Ruth made a sound like she might commit a felony. I need you to hear me, I said. This is still your life. Your decision. I will not drag you by the hand away from a man you love, but love cannot require you to stand still while someone removes your mother from your throat. Grace pressed the pearls to her chest. I kept waiting for Evan to say something, she said. I know. He looked scared of her. Yes. What does that mean? I did not answer quickly. She deserved better than a quick answer. It means, I said, that before you marry him, you need to know whether he is a man who can stand beside you when standing costs him something. No. We left the party 20 minutes later. Grace did not return for photographs. Victoria sent a message through Evan asking if she was done making a scene. Grace read it, turned off her phone, and walked out with her mother's pearls in her purse. That night, she forwarded me the documents. Marcus called at 6:40 the next morning. Sam, he said, why is your daughter being asked to sit on the advisory board of a foundation that moves money through 3 related entities and pays consulting fees to companies owned by the founder's relatives? I sat at my kitchen table in the gray light before sunrise. Say that again, I said. He did, slower. The foundation was supposed to fund patient family support, youth caregiver scholarships, and rural elder care programs. But from the public filings, Marcus could pull quickly. Large portions of the money moved into administrative contracts. Some went to strategic consulting, some went to brand partnerships. Several of those vendors had addresses connected to Caldwell executives. Grace's name, Marcus told me, would be valuable. A hospital social worker, a grieving daughter, a kind face, someone no one would suspect of helping polish a dirty window. They want her credibility, Marcus said, and possibly her signature. By noon, Grace had hired Marcus as her independent counsel. By dinner, she had canceled a meeting with Victoria. By the next morning, Evan was at her apartment. I was not there. I only know what Grace told me later. He said his mother had been under stress. He said the necklace incident was ugly, but not worth destroying a wedding. He said Grace had misunderstood the foundation papers. He said his family did things at a level she was not used to yet. That sentence ended the engagement more than the pearls did. Grace asked him one question. When your mother put her hands on me, why didn't you stop her? He said, you know how she gets. Grace took off her ring and set it on the coffee table. No, she said. I know how you get. He left angry, then apologetic, then angry again. That cycle continued for 2 weeks, and each time Grace sounded a little steadier. 3 months later, Caldwell Meridian became a headline. Federal and state investigators filed a civil complaint alleging Medicaid overbilling, false staffing records, illegal referral arrangements, and misuse of charitable foundation funds across multiple assisted living facilities. The complaint was over 100 pages long and written in the dry language of people who know exactly where the bodies are buried and have brought maps. Victoria called it a political attack. Her lawyers called it a misunderstanding. A spokesperson said the company had always placed residents first. I had heard versions of those sentences for 3 decades. They usually arrive right before the documents start speaking louder than the people. Within 2 weeks, 2 banks suspended credit lines. A development partner in Missouri walked away from a new facility. The state froze certain reimbursements pending review. Former employees began talking. Families of residents began asking questions that deserved answers years earlier. Evan was not criminally charged at first, but his name appeared in emails attached to the complaint. He had known enough to be useful, and not enough to be innocent in the way decent people mean the word. He eventually resigned from the company and moved to Arizona, or Denver, or somewhere else people go when they want distance to look like growth. Grace cried over him. I want you to understand that doing the right thing does not spare you grief. Sometimes it gives you grief with clean edges. She missed the version of him she had loved. She missed the future she had imagined. She missed being able to believe his silence was temporary. One night she called me and said, "Please don't tell me I dodged a bullet." So I didn't. I said, "Tell me what you miss." And she did. 15 months after that engagement party, Victoria Caldwell stood in federal court for sentencing after taking a plea agreement connected to fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction. Marcus asked Grace whether she wanted to attend. I told her she did not owe anyone her presence. She said, "I want her to see the necklace." So we went. Grace wore a black dress, a gray coat, and her mother's pearls. I wore my brown suit. The courtroom was not grand. Courtrooms rarely are. They are mostly wood, fluorescent light, paper, and consequence. Victoria entered with her attorneys, thinner than she had been, her hair still perfect, her mouth set hard. She looked toward the gallery, because people like Victoria always look for the audience. Her eyes moved over the rows. Then they found Grace. Then they found me. For the first time since I had met her, Victoria Caldwell had no expression ready. One of her attorneys leaned in and whispered something. I do not know what. Maybe he told her who I had been. Maybe he told her I was not the harmless old man she had believed me to be. Maybe he told her nothing at all, and she simply remembered the champagne bucket, the hallway, and the fact that consequences sometimes wear brown suits. The judge spoke for a long time about trust, about vulnerable residents, about public money, about charity used as camouflage, about the particular cruelty of stealing from systems built to care for people who cannot fight back. Victoria received 9 years in federal prison, restitution, forfeiture of several assets, and a permanent ban from operating healthcare facilities. When the sentence was read, Grace reached for my hand, not because she was happy, because something heavy had finally been set down. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. Victoria did not look at us. Evan was not there. Grace and I walked 2 blocks to a diner where the coffee tasted burned, and the waitress called me honey. We sat in a booth by the window. Grace took off the pearls and laid them on the table between us. I used to think Mom left me these so I could feel close to her, she said. I nodded. Now, I think she left them so I'd know when someone was trying to take her place. That broke me a little. I looked at my daughter, at the woman she had become, and I thought about all the small days that had brought us there, packing lunches, signing permission slips, sitting through school concerts, holding her when Elaine died, teaching her how to change a tire, learning when to speak and when to let silence give her room. Trust is not built in one dramatic rescue. It is built in ordinary proof, given over and over, until your child knows that when the room turns against them, they can look across it and find you still standing there. Victoria Caldwell had money, influence, photographers, lawyers, and buildings with her name carved into stone, but she did not understand the value of a handkerchief. She did not understand what it means to preserve something small because love touched it. She did not understand that a quiet person is not always a powerless person. And she certainly did not understand that the people who spend their lives doing honest work often leave behind something more dangerous than wealth. They leave behind people who trust their word. So, brothers and sisters, parents and children, let me ask you what I asked myself that night at the Hawthorne Club. When someone you love is being humiliated in front of a room full of people, do you reach for them, or do you look around to calculate what it might cost? If you think I did the right thing by staying calm, making those calls, and letting my daughter choose her own way out, comment number 1. If you think I should have confronted Victoria in front of every guest and made her pick those pearls out of the ice herself, comment number 2. If you think I should have stayed out of it completely and let Grace handle her future marriage alone, comment number 3, and tell me where you are watching from tonight. Tell me whether you have ever sat in a room where money made people cowardly. Tell me who reached for you when you needed it most. If this story meant something to you, subscribe to Nan. I am just an old man, telling stories about families, pride, quiet strength, and the kind of justice that takes its time but still finds the door. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental. The smallest acts of love often become the strongest protection. A handkerchief, a steady voice, a father who stays close without taking over. When life puts someone we love in a painful room, we do not always need to shout. Sometimes we simply stand beside them, help them remember their worth, and give them courage to walk toward a kinder future.